Our Jennifer Mayerle recently released her WCCO original, Footprint to Murder. The documentary has been viewed hundreds of thousands of times online, but now a new way to watch this case unfold. Erin Moriarty with 48 Hours joins us now with a preview of a story you'll see Saturday night here on CBS. So Erin, just to remind viewers, this case surrounds a murdered woman in Minneapolis, and the only real clue left behind was a bare, bloody footprint. It took investigators decades to solve this crime, and DNA evidence ended up being the real key here. But DNA can also pose a problem. So tell us about that.
Well, I think when you hear that there's been a hit because of genetic genealogy and you have identified DNA at a scene, you think, okay, that's case closed. But in this case, you cannot date DNA. And in this case, there were other profiles in the apartment. And so I think that's the reason why the footprints really became the crucial evidence, because those footprints were left in Jeannie's blood. And that meant that the killer or the person who left those footprints was either there at the time of her murder or shortly afterwards.
Erin, we often hear of fingerprints being found at crime scenes. Of course, that's familiar to everyone at home. But is it actually rare that investigators are left with bloody footprints?
It's very rare. And in fact, the state expert in this case had only encountered one case before. I'd never run into it. And I think what makes that a little more interesting is the fact that there's a large database for fingerprints, but that doesn't exist for footprints because investigators don't encounter it very often.
And curious if footprints are actually as unique as fingerprints, Erin.
Well, that is what the experts say. That was a big question I had, because if you don't have a large database, how do you know? But they do point out that the same kind of friction ridge skin that we have on our fingerprints also exists on the foot. They can follow the same kind of furrows, and that's what happened in this case.
And then we have the name Jerry Westrom, which if people have watched Jennifer Mayerle's documentary, they may be familiar, but it seemed to come out of the blue in this case. And aside from his DNA found at the crime scene, was there any evidence that Jerry actually knew Jeanie Childs?
There didn't appear to be any kind of evidence that connected Jerry other than the DNA at the scene and then ultimately that part of the footprint. He was someone who was living in the same town that Jeannie's mother and sister lived in, but there was no evidence that he had met her. He was, as Jennifer has said, a hockey dad, a church-going father, and husband. And so it was a surprise to a lot of people when his name came up. And there are people we talked to in this report who absolutely insist that he could not have done this. He has no history of violence.
Interesting. Well, we'll see how it all plays out. Erin Moriarty live for us. We're looking forward to 48 Hours. That's Saturday night here on WCCO and CBS. Thank you for your time, Erin.
Thanks so much, Erin.